Hi and welcome to AXA XL Arctic Live. We're broadcasting from the UK Arctic Research Station here in Ny-Ålesund, and that is the most northerly permanent community in the world. We're on the Svalbard archipelago. It's a group of islands between the north of Norway and the North Pole. So basically everything that way we have a little bit of Svalbard left, and then it is open ocean and then sea ice all the way to the North Pole. Greenland over this way, and Norway down to the south. And delighted to be here with Hannah Green, a PhD student in polar oceanography. And we will be talking about ocean acidification today. We've just done an ocean acidification live investigation. Wonderful to have you on AXA XL Arctic Live, Hannah. Welcome.
Nice to be here. Hello, everyone.
So we've got a few things we're going to do. We are going to have a look outside, Hannah, and we're going to sort of talk a little bit about where you've been doing the sampling over the past week or so that we've been up here. And we'll have a look around, then we'll come back in and we will have the opportunity to answer all your amazing questions about ocean acidification, the Arctic in a high CO2 world, as well as life and science in the very cold. So we had minus 25 with wind chill on the first sampling day, which was definitely quite difficult out there on the boat. Before we get started, a big welcome to all the schools who are watching. We have schools in the UAE and Germany. Big good morning to you guys. Hi. And a special shout out to Miss Jen's MS2 class at the International School Ruhr in Essen, Germany. Hi to all the students watching there. Wonderful to have you with us. But let's have a pop outside, and we're in here normally because it is quite cold. I think the atmospheric temperature is only sort of -3 or -4 today, but with the wind up, it can get quite chilly in a short amount of time. So we'll come out here. Don't trip over the leads. We can't have any wireless or Wi-Fi up here because of the scientific instrumentation. So, Hannah, we've got this wonderful expanse reaching down past the research station to the glaciers at the end. I'm just going to hand over the microphone. Hold it quite close because there's a bit of wind up, but we can have you describe where you've been sampling over the past few days.
Great. So, the past few days, we've been sampling. We've done 3 sites over here, this direction here. So you can see just in front of that glacier there, we had a sample site, and we had a couple over that way there. And then our last 2 are just, you can't really see it, but past all these buildings, this is the entrance to the fjord, and there's 2 sampling sites further out there. And our team today are currently out there finishing off the last few, because sadly we had a bit of an issue at the end of the day yesterday where our plankton net just ripped in half. And the plankton net is a big cone-shaped net. You might have seen some pictures online of it, and it literally tore down both sides just because these conditions are really harsh for all the equipment, and so sometimes it takes its toll, all the freezing water and bits of ice chunks. It's just we had to go and get another net, and they've gone back out there today.
Right. And just to give a bit of an overview of what we're looking at, so we have the dark waters here are the fjord, and that's a Norwegian term for a sea inlet, and it's coming down to the glaciers at the end. Now we have you can see 2 different types of glacier. We've got that main glacier in the middle, the Kronebryn, and that is that sort of darker, cracked up ice, and that is moving at an incredible rate of 3 meters per day, and that's up to 6 to 7 meters per day in the summer months, and carving off. So that's where the icebergs in the fjord are coming, and on those first days it was definitely dodging the icebergs to do the sampling. So bits of that glacier break off and form the icebergs in the fjord. You can see that slower glacier further to the right behind the antenna, that's the Kongsvegen, moving more slowly and not as broken up. Now at the end of the fjord, that's a good 10-15 kilometers away, but in this very clear Arctic air, it looks like you can almost touch it. And even further are these amazing pyramidal peaks and those are the Tre Krona. One of them is behind that bluff at the end, but they're named after the three old Scandinavian kingdoms of Danska, Svenska, and Nora. And those are about 25, 30 kilometers from us, but look like they're much closer. It can be quite deceptive traveling around the polar regions and the clarity of the air making things seem far closer than they actually are. But if we just turn round, I'm just going to hand back to Hannah. First time up in the Arctic, we're in a research station. So if you come over here, and I'm going to pass over the microphone again, just to describe what it's like being based here and the different rooms that we have.
So the base here, we've each got, it's pretty luxurious considering we're in the middle of the Arctic and far away from any town or city. So we each have our own rooms. We've got a main living room, some really good labs, area where we can write up and do our work, as well as the main mess hall, which is around the corner there, and that's where all the different research stations can then go and share some stories and get some really nice food. And actually the food here is incredible considering how far away we are and we don't get fresh food. The food is very yummy.
And I mean, one of the wonderful things about working here in Neolesund is the international science community, and we have stations from 10 different countries, from, I think, let's go through them: Norway, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, the UK, Japan, Korea, India, and China. So wonderful to have all those different nations there all together in the mess hall, and it gives an international flavour of research science. But how are your hands doing? Should we pop back inside and see if there are any questions coming through? Let's get back inside. I mean, even though it's only minus sort of 3 or 4 degrees ambient temperature, it is the wind that really gets you. On the first day of sampling, we're getting the water samples out of the ocean at minus sort of 1.5 degrees, I think the ocean temperature was, but then freezing pretty rapidly once we got them out. Hannah, just before we start off with some of the questions coming through, you're doing a PhD. What kind of stage does that mean you're at in your academic career?
Well, I'm really just starting off. I'm 6 months into my PhD. Although I have already spent 5 years at university, I'm just really starting with my research career. I've got another 3 years to go, so, of my PhD, and then you can do postdoctorate and go on further to fellowships, etc. So really at the beginning.
So that's the stage you've done your undergraduate degree. That's a normal degree that students might apply to at university, and then you did a master's.
Yeah, I did a research master's, so that was a 2-year master's from start to finish. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then you're moving on to the PhD, which is more independent research.
Yeah, so it's independent led. My topic is on ocean acidification in the Arctic Ocean. Now I'm trying to develop a method to monitor ocean acidification using satellites and remote sensing. So it's currently, the previous research has been done at lower latitudes, and Arctic has several challenges to those the current methods. So I'm going to develop those current methods and hopefully get some results.
So if you're using satellites and remote sensing, why is it still important to come to the Arctic? Can't we just do everything from the comfort of a university or a satellite control centre somewhere sort of warmer and less remote?
Well, that wouldn't be much fun. So the most important reason to come here is to ground truth all the data and the models that you can get, and to show that it's actually working. And we really need to get a sense of the actual environment, because you can't see the interactions from behind a computer screen.
So coming out and getting cold hands and cold fingers and sort of rocking about in a boat, still incredibly important, even though we have all this technology available to us. And that wonderful term, ground truth, where we have these computer models or these remote sensing tools, but unless you're on the ground, very tricky to know what's actually going on. And briefly, before we get into some of these questions, we've talked a lot about ocean acidification. What is that? I mean, are we getting in here and we're sort of our feet are dissolving in an acid bath, or is it something different?
No, so ocean acidification is only a very small pH decrease. It's only becoming very small. It's a small fraction acidic. So basically, what is happening is because of increased carbon dioxide production since the Industrial Revolution, there's all this extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that the ocean is a big carbon sink. So these carbon dioxide molecules are then absorbing into the ocean, and then they're separating out, and that separation is producing acid. So it wouldn't be harmful to you or me, but to calcifying organisms such as like mussels or clams, that makes it suddenly really hard for them to then produce their shells. So that's where they're struggling. So it's perfectly safe for us.
But we talk about calcifying organisms, and those are the types of creatures that are found in the ocean that use calcium carbonate to build their structures or skeletons. So as you mentioned, there's the shellfish and some crustaceans and coral as well.
Yes, coral. So coral are also a massive ecosystem engineer. So you can have coral or like mull, which is a calcifying algae. So they produce massive ecosystems that loads of other species depend on them. So if that foundation species is affected by OA, that will then affect the whole rest of the ecosystem. It's likewise if any smaller, lower down the food chain organisms are affected, it will then have a knock-on effect to the rest of the food chain that eat them, basically.
And that was just a twice-weekly flight going overhead, if you're wondering what that buzzing was. So we are wonderfully connected with flights on Mondays and Thursdays, and that will mean this afternoon from 5 to 6, the most northerly shop in the world will be open for 2 hours. 2 hours. I'm very excited. We stock up on M&Ms and other goodies to keep us going. And we talked a little bit about the impact on the life and affecting the sort of bottom of the food chain first, and that knock-on effect. I think when people consider think about the sort of plankton, they think they're sort of small and insignificant, but that's not the case.
No, they are vital to everyone. So phytoplankton.
And that's a small
They're like, they've taken light and they've taken energy from the sun, and they feed the rest of the oceans, because from the phytoplankton, then you have the zooplankton, which are like the animal little
all the pods, the sort of copepods and the pteropods. I think we've got some video of them which we can show you.
Yeah, so and then go up all over the food chain, increases. So from that one phytoplankton, it's then supporting the rest of the food web.
Amazing. And question coming in from the International School in Roe. To describe sort of we talked a little bit about some of the impacts, but what are the impacts of high CO2 on the Arctic ecosystem?
So that is a really good question, and that is basically for my PhD, we're developing a method to monitor this change in the carbonate chemistry. So that's the change that the carbon dioxide is having on the ocean. And hopefully we'll be able to develop answers to that. So we only have a really small idea at the moment to this whole massive picture. The challenge of doing all the research in the Arctic is that the Arctic ecosystems are so variable. The properties of the water are so variable, because if you think about the Arctic and where we are, we're at the top of the globe. And so you've got the North Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans meeting. We're a meeting point of two oceans. Now these two oceans have different properties, and that is where you have completely different, you can have completely different carbonate chemistry, as well as then you have global warming, which is leading to freshening of the Arctic, and the freshening of the Arctic means there's lots of fresh water coming into the base, and that's into the ocean body. So that's also causing carbonate chemistry changes. So that's why there's so many different variables that we just need to better understand.
But carrying on from that, I mean, things that have stood out for me about the Arctic are that ocean acidification is happening faster here than in other parts of the ocean.
So because of the cold temperature, carbon dioxide absorbs more readily in the water. So if you compare to, say, at the equator, the carbon dioxide is being taken up. So the Arctic is a larger carbon sink than, say, the warmer waters. So that means we are going to see ocean acidification faster than anywhere else.
And also we're warming faster here as well. Yeah. So in terms of high carbon dioxide concentrations, the impact on the Arctic ecosystem, there's more warming and more acidification happening in the Arctic Ocean than in other parts of the world.
Yeah, because of the reduced sea ice cover. So when there was greater sea ice, there was less exposed ocean, and now obviously there's greater water exposed to the atmosphere, and then that's increasing the uptake, as well as increasing the warming, because if you have a white surface, if you're wearing a white t-shirt on a hot day, you're going to feel relatively cool, but then if you put a black t-shirt on, you suddenly feel, oh, I'm a bit hot. So that's the same. So the ocean is a lot darker than the ice, and so it reflects less energy and less heat.
And I think on the website we have talking about albedo, there's the quality of the white and its reflection, that we have an activity online on the Encounter ET website that allows you to investigate those properties, the different sort of absorption of light. We use an angle poised light and different colours of felt to sort of mimic that in some ways. Coming back to these questions from the International School of Ruhr, these are sort of pointed towards your research interests, and why are you doing this research? What is the point?
What's the point?
Small question to start you off with.
It's a very large question. So mainly the point is we need to better understand what is happening here, because we will be seeing it first. And if we have a greater understanding, and if I manage to develop a method to monitor this change in carbonate chemistry and ocean acidification as a whole, then we can apply what we learn in the Arctic to the rest of the planet, because this is the frontier. This is where it's happening first, and then we can develop further research to understand how it's going to affect ecosystems, how it will affect agriculture, fisheries. I'm working, part of my PhD, I'm working with AXA XL on the risk it could cause. So it's has many.
There's a lot of wider impacts that we need to consider, and the societal and economic impacts, and infrastructure. It does come because we do have this we do need to consider this infrastructure of our future food.
Yeah, that's true.
And aquaculture being put out as one of the possible solutions to feeding a growing human population. And if that aquaculture is based in the marine environment rather than being on shore, then ocean acidification will have a potential impact there. And I think that, certainly from the research I've seen, is also, we can look at adults, and there's been a lot of research on adults and the potential changes from future lower pH, but also the larval stages seem to be very sensitive to these changes as well.
Yeah, so the larval stages tend to be more sensitive than adult stages, just because they quite often species that have less ability to acid-base regulate. So that tends to be where particular species are affected.
So we need to look out for that. So coming through from the International School, this is an incredibly important thing. Looking at sort of the frontier, as you will call it, the front line of ocean chemistry change and how that might affect the rest of the planet, and in fact affect us all because of the impact it could have on our food production. How did you first get interested in this area?
So I first did an ocean acidification project for my undergraduate dissertation, and I looked at the effect of decreased pH on mussels, metabolic rates, so the edible mussels that we have like around the UK and Europe. And in my experiments, I saw a decrease in metabolic rates, so the lower pH affected mussels' ability to metabolism. And that's really where it started.
And had what mussels and ocean acidification, was that a random choice, or was that something you were particularly interested in during your undergraduate course?
I think I wanted to do something that was current.
Okay.
And yeah, so I thought it would be an interesting topic, so I went to research.
And it's really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's really interesting the sort of industry angle that it's coming into, that it's not just someone sitting in an ivory tower, going, oh, well, this sounds like an interesting question. It's actually has that relevance to business, economics, society. So coming back to where we are in the Arctic, what is it? It's probably a little bit different from being at university. Just a bit. What is a typical day like up here?
So a typical day is we wake up just before breakfast, which is always at 8 o'clock. We go to the dining hall, which is just along the way. And you have an amazing spread of all you could possibly eat for breakfast, which is incredible. And then we come back. Hopefully we would have got all the sampling gear ready the night before. So then it's ready to go. We have like big boxes of bottles for water sampling, all labelled up. The plankton net, we have niskins, which we fire down to get different depths of water samples. And they'll already be loaded up on the boat. And then we literally put all the equipment on the sledge and we pull it along on trolley down to the boat, which is just literally about 5-minute walk down that way. And then we'll head out on the boat to whatever sampling site we're going to that day. And then our pattern tends to be we take the carbonic chemistry samples first. So we fire the niskins at different depths. And when we're firing the niskins at different depths, we're then filling different sample bottles up depending what we want to what we're looking at. So first of all, it could be we are looking at the dissolved in organic carbon, and that's in our sample bottle, but we're also looking at nutrients and oxygen. And then once we finish that, we then go on to looking at vertical plankton. We do a vertical plankton, so we're looking at all the plankton at one point in the water column. And then we're looking at microplastics. So we do some plankton tools and microplastics as well.
And I mean, if you could describe in a few words what it's like to be on a boat bobbing about in the Arctic, how would you describe that to our students watching, who probably won't have experienced that yet, but hopefully will be up here in years to come to try this, to pursue a career in getting to know the Arctic and studying it and helping us understand this region?
So I say the first thing I've experienced this week is highly variable. Our first day with wind chill was about -25, and that was cold, unsurprisingly. Everything kept freezing. The big tubes, Niskin tubes, it literally had frozen the bottle, so we couldn't get the sample out. So then we had to, luckily, our boat captain's awesome, and he had the kettle on hand to unfreeze. And we had like solid bits of ice in the plankton net. yeah, so it made it extremely challenging, and it's also, you had ice on the deck, so it was a bit slippy, so you had to be careful. And when we're doing the plankton trawls, we also take a blank, an air sample, to make sure there's no microplastics in the air that could affect the sample, basically. So when you do that, you have to hold out basically a bit of filter paper to the air for the duration of the trawl. And when you're holding this filter paper out of your hands, and we're wearing these big gloves, and you can only fit on a small glove liner underneath, and in -25 you get finger pain. So you have to keep swapping hands to warm up the other finger. But then the next day was completely different again. It was warmer, but we had big swell, so we're rolling, and like the boat's rolling around, and we're trying to do the chemicals into the samples. And when you're rolling and you're trying to do like quite delicate work, that can be a big challenge. And then the last few days have been bliss. They've been beautiful sunshine, like calmer seas, and you're thinking, oh, this is like nicer days than we get sometimes in the UK. So like really variable. But it's good to have those really gnarly days of like push you.
And being out with this scenery.
Oh, spectacular! So even on a when it's slightly challenging, you can just look out and you're like, wow, I'm very lucky to be here.
And we talked about some of the challenges that you face doing the research, like having to get a kettle to melt off, to melt the ice that's sort of sealing up the Niskin bottle, this tube that you use to collect seawater samples. What other challenges do you face from being somewhere so remote?
I guess, well, if you think about safety wise, if we had a medical emergency, we would have to then be medevaced to the nearest hospital, which is in Longyear. And that's how far away is that?
Well, it's a 25-minute flight, and there's a clinic there, and then the hospital proper is another 2-hour flight away in Tromsø.
So you have to always think about your safety. That's always definitely a challenge. And if you have equipment breaking and there's no one, you can't find a spare on the base, then you either have to make do and mend, or try and adapt your survey methods to use basically what you have, because it's quite hard to get anything out here in the time we're here.
So a few difficult challenges. So I mean, we talked a little bit about the sort of the interest in the Arctic. But when you started your challenge, and you spoke before about the Arctic is changing faster than other parts of the ocean, and that's why you chose this area to focus on. Did you ever think when you started your PhD that you'd actually come to the Arctic? Was that always a plan?
Well, I definitely hoped, because it's always been a dream of mine to come here, and it's definitely lived up to expectations. So yeah.
And what was the draw coming to this region?
I guess not many people have been here, and it feels like still quite exciting and new, and we see so much on TV, like these amazing environments, on nature documentaries, but I think the Arctic is still quite untouched, and it's like there's not so much human impact here, although we definitely are seeing it, but compared to the rest of the planet, I think that's definitely a big draw.
So I mean, definitely sort of, when people talk about pristine environments, and definitely, although there is evidence of human impact, it does feel pristine in many ways, which is absolutely, it's wonderful. So coming through some really nitty gritty particular questions, what is the coldest temperature you have ever experienced?
Well, I think that was our first day sampling, -25, yeah.
Brilliant. So yes, I mean, -25. They say that it starts at -25, so everything down to -25 is fine. And I think out on the water that's probably not the case. Certainly on the dry of the land, that's it. But then every 5 degrees below -25, things get twice as hard. Yeah. So I think the coldest temperature we've had with wind chill was about -55. Wow. We were definitely not out on the water or out on the glacier at -55, but that it can definitely, you can sort of, your fingers go and your face goes incredibly quickly. Have you International School of Royal would like to know, have you ever experienced a life-threatening situation?
Yes, but mainly I scuba dive a lot, and I've done a lot of scuba diving research. And sometimes in diving, things just go wrong. And if you panicked and you did the wrong thing, that would definitely threaten your life. But you just have to think, remain calm, and then do exactly how you're training, and then you're perfectly fine.
Can you talk us through
An example?
An example, yeah.
I've had been guiding dives with less experienced divers, and one time, for example, someone hadn't clipped their weight pouch. So when you're diving, you need weights to get down because you're quite buoyant. You're wearing like lots of neoprene, and this guy's weight pouch fell out, so he started ascending quite rapidly. So as this guy, I tried to reduce his flow. So you have the jacket, and so as a guide, I like to always be overweighted because you're never sure what can go wrong. And so this guy started quite ascending too fast, so I released air out of my jacket, so I was negatively buoyant to reduce his speed, and I pulled on his dunk valve, and so we came up at a gradual ascent rate rather than really fast. So yeah, it was perfectly fine, but yeah, it could have
gone pretty badly wrong. Coming back to the Arctic, one of the things we try and do with Arctic Live is to give young people a sense of the Arctic environment. Having been here now for a week, has being in the Arctic changed your perspective on anything?
So with my research, I'm going to be using a global data set to ground truth a lot of my work. And I think I'm really going to appreciate every single data point that I'm going to be using that someone else has collected, because I can appreciate the work that's gone into getting that data, because it is challenging, and sometimes it's long days and it's cold, and this environment does definitely have a toll on your body. Like the 24-hour daylight means it's a bit slightly harder to sleep at night, the dry air and the cold. So it is a challenging environment for like your body, and I think I'll appreciate the scientists that have collected that data that I will be using.
And on a personal basis, has anything sort of shifted for you about how you see these issues that we talk about almost quite theoretically when we talk about climate change, we talk about ocean acidification, and they're quite, these invisible processes happening. Has being here made you or shifted your view at all?
Yeah, Nick, the base manager, he was saying how the sea ice used to be all sea ice at this time of year, and the fact that, I mean, the only icebergs within the glacier is quite, like, you hear about the sea ice loss across the Arctic, but actually being here and seeing it in a piece of ocean that should normally have sea ice on it, and there's completely open water, is quite sad and shocking, I think.
So go through a quick few questions. We have: do any Arctic fish or animals help to keep the Arctic water clean?
So you have, for example, mussels. They filter feed. So they like to take in like little bits of algae. And so, for example, if you had a mussel, if you had two, I think there's experiments online I've seen. You can have, say, a mussel in one pot and it's all green, the water with the algae, and you put another pot with just both same algae, and then you leave the mussels to filter feed. That water then become clearer. So they filter the water out basically, and
so
taking all that in their food.
So these wonderful filter feeding animals.
Yes.
Quickly, what Arctic animals have you seen while you've been here?
Well, we were lucky enough to see a minke whale a couple of times. It was pretty cool. We saw sea angel, which is just as cool as a whale, slightly smaller. A sea angel is like it's a plankton, and it literally is the most beautiful thing because it kind of flutters around like this, and you can see that we had it in one of our plankton samples, and we got it out under the microscope, and you just like see it flutting around. It's just really beautiful. We've seen reindeer, amazing where we have our breakfast and dinner. It's a massive glass front, and most of the time we're lucky enough to see the reindeer just munching around, trying to find what food they can. And it's beautiful to be like, you have this amazing backdrop of the mountains and the glacier, and then you have these reindeer just having a little munch around. And then we also got to see an Arctic fox, which was really cool. Sadly, I haven't managed to get any pictures of them, any of the. They're a bit camera shy here. I'll bring my camera to dinner or something, and the one time I remember to bring it, it's like they're off somewhere else.
And I mean, I think you've very wonderfully demonstrated the movement of some of the plankton found in the waters around Ny-Ålesund. I think there is a series of videos from the science team doing different types of plankton dance to help aid plankton identification for our students. So we'll get those up hopefully in the next days, and maybe we can get some students doing a plankton dance.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, if
somewhere
you
a bit
want to
warmer.
send your plankton dancers in, I'd love to see them.
Brilliant. We'll get that up soon. So, question coming through. Obviously, we're talking about changes in the Arctic, which are not hugely positive, to put it mildly. What can students watching do to help mitigate some of these changes happening?
So firstly, reduce your carbon footprint. So you can do this by, for example, if your mum normally gives you, or your mum or dad normally gives you a lift to school, maybe think about walking or cycling with them. Ask if that's possible, or get public transport. Always get public transport where you can instead of driving your own vehicle. Eating less meat. Not saying you have to become vegetarian or vegan, but maybe just having meat as a treat rather than like several times a day. It makes a large impact. It's where also looking after our carbon stores, so supporting like rain.
Well, the carbon stores, I mean, I think that's a very important, it's a sort of technical term that we give to living areas of the planet that are containing, and these environments that contain carbon, and when we destroy them, that's released back into the atmosphere. So, I mean, the most famous being the rainforest, I think. But there's sort of forests and other habitats around the world that we can look after and keep that in, as well as reducing our own carbon footprint, is also looking after those stores that already exist, which is a really, really great idea. And any other tips? So we've got making sure our travel is less carbon intensive. We've got that walking or bicycling, and then we've got making sure our eating is less carbon intensive by moving to that plant-based diet. And even starting with a meat-free Monday, if you know the idea of
that's a really good idea.
Going vegetarian or vegan straight off feels like it's sort of too much of a step. So gradually increasing the amount of plants you eat and decreasing the amount of meat that you're eating. A few more questions that we have coming through. This one is biggie. How much carbon dioxide is there in the ocean?
That's a really good question. Because when carbon dioxide is absorbed, it like breaks down into different molecules. I can answer that off the top of my head for you. And it would be, there are estimates of the carbon sink value, and which are reduced every year. So I can have a look at that, but off the top of my head, I don't know that exact value.
I mean, is it right that sort of roughly 30% of the human generated carbon dioxide since the the industrial revolution, about 30% of that has been absorbed into the ocean.
Yeah.
How much that is, but it is taking up a lot of this atmospheric carbon dioxide, and it's almost we could say that the ocean's helping by reducing the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide and reducing climate change, but at the same time that is not having a sort of null effect. It is having an impact on the ocean. So we can't just say, oh well, it's okay. The ocean will just take it all up and we'll be fine. It is having this negative impact. Ocean acidification. Do we know, Hannah, what the predicted increase of ocean acidity is by the year 2030?
We do know that, but I don't want to get the exact figure wrong off the top of my head.
I mean, most of the models that I've seen have been looking at end of century projections, and certainly, you've got that sort of 7.7, 7.6 sort of.
Our carbon stores are reducing. We have important marine stores like seagrass meadows, mangroves, salt marshes. They're also massive carbon stores. And for example, seagrass meadows are in massive decline. So not only are we losing the ability for a seagrass meadow to absorb the carbon dioxide, is also seagrass stores the carbon in its sediments, and when it's in a declining rate, you're then releasing all that stored carbon dioxide back. So when it's decomposing. So.
I mean, would it be fair to say that we're looking in the next sort of 80 years, by the end of the century, sort of 120% increase in ocean acidity from where we are now, sort of 0.4 of a unit? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And are there different models that give different ranges?
Yes, yeah. So there are definitely different models. There are several different models for the Arctic, even for every. It depends where you are on the planet and the ocean.
And it depends on how we behave, as we pointed out earlier. Brilliant. And here's a tough one. It's really looking at sort of what's the biggest problem for the oceans. And we hear in the news there's lots of different pieces, and we mentioned some of them here. We've got plastics in the news quite a lot. We've got climate and ocean warming. Mm-hmm. We've got ocean acidification. We've got habitat loss. If you were to focus on one, I would say this is the one that we need to focus on. Is it possible to say that?
So I think what we need to focus on is reducing our carbon, reducing the carbon we produce and protecting our carbon stores. That carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases is the most important, in my opinion, is what we need to focus on. There are many other threats, but I would say, in my opinion, they're the greatest.
And sometimes this term multiple stresses is used for how an environment such as the Arctic or the coral reef or the seagrass might respond. I mean, what does that mean? This multiple stressing. We've sort of got one here, the carbon issue.
Yeah.
But what is this multiple stress thing all about?
So, for example, I use seagrass as an example. If an ecosystem is healthy, it has more resilience to, even if it has one negative impact, to bounce back. But if you have loads of different stresses from everywhere else, then they're less resilient, and then that's when you swap to a rate of decline rather than growth. Like seagrass, does it? What affects seagrass is like coastal development, anything that reduces light levels. You have invasive algae, nutrients runoff, so that all those stresses on that ecosystem, and then it's suddenly like, oh, that's too much. So like the Arctic's got many global warming, ocean acidification. So all these animals that are in the oceans, they've got so much to deal with that we want to build resilience and improve those ecosystems rather than put too much strain on them.
Brilliant. And then we've got time for one final question, and that is, what do you enjoy most about your work, and what words of inspiration could you share with our students watching?
What's the hard one thing? I Well, for example, this year I'd say most I enjoy about is getting to see this incredible place where we are. It's like no other place I've ever been to. Spectacular scenery. I love to learn and engage. Talking to like you guys, it's fantastic. And what was the last bit?
The last bit of what words of encouragement would you share, or inspiration would you share with our, to put you on the spot completely, with the students watching?
There is hope. Don't give up. Do the best you can do, but also don't be too harsh on yourself. If we worked collectively together, we can make it. We can lower those impacts. So yeah, do every little bit you can.
Well, wonderful. Hannah, thank you so much for being part of AXA Exhale Arctic Live this year. And thank you to all the students watching. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So there is hope. Do get involved in following science, following what's happening in the Arctic, and also do your bit. Hannah wonderfully mentioned those steps you can take, those two big steps, looking at how you travel and examining how you eat, and helping to reduce the burden that the life in the Arctic is facing through those twin threats of ocean warming and ocean acidification. Thank you very much for being part of this live broadcast, this expert interview. We are back in just over an hour with an Arctic Q&A, and that's Ellie and myself. And then for our North American audiences, we are back this afternoon with a live investigation looking at the process and impacts of ocean acidification. As also, Hannah will be joining us again to talk through her research and the threats that this beautiful but fragile ecosystem is facing. But for now, it's goodbye from Arctic Live. Bye bye.